The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Today on Leadership Lunch, we're going to be discussing 3 techniques to beat your deadlines and create more hours in your day. Welcome to the call, everyone. My name is Andrew Winnig. Thanks for being here with us. A couple of administrative things as we get started. There are a bunch of people on the call, so everyone is in mute mode. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. There's a way on your control panel to raise your hand. So if you can hear my voice and see the screen, please go ahead and raise your hand now so I know that the technology is working. Excellent, thank you. And there is a way for you to put questions through. Since everyone is mute, we do have a chat function, and you can put questions through in that. So if you could now just fill in your question box, just type in how you heard about this webinar. I'd really appreciate that. So just take a minute and fill in the question back. Just chat to me kind of how you heard about the webinar. Excellent. Thank you. So as we get started now, we've got a couple more people logging on. So as they log on, I'm going to launch the first poll. So please let me know when you usually finish your work. Excellent. So we're split right down the middle now. We got a bunch of people who are just in time and a bunch of people who are running behind, and that means this webinar is perfect for you because what we're going to be talking about today is the good reason for that. And the reason is that in our schools today, it's a special word we use when we talk about teamwork. We call teamwork cheating. It's cheating. If they catch you working together on tests or problem sets or exams, you get in trouble, and then they throw you out. So it's no wonder that people get out into the workforce and they're faced with too much work to do, and the tendency is to feel like you have to get it all done yourself. I work with a lot of people who are always focused on getting the work done themselves. And what we're going to be talking about today is a part of a better way. It's called collective engineering, and it's literally the process for developing great teams. I was working with a client recently who wouldn't admit to me until after we had started working together that before we worked together, he hated teams. He found that he was burdened with all the work, that it was too much bother to interact with people, that he just felt like the whole thing was a burden. And then after learning some collective engineering techniques, he now loves teams. Things get done faster. There are more and better ideas. He's had a complete turnaround. He doesn't have to get all the work done himself. So he's very excited about that. So once again, we're talking today about collective engineering, and it's the process of developing great teams. See, the thing that probably no one has ever told you about work getting done is that when you first assign tasks to people, the work not getting done is the first step in that process. And collective engineering is a set of strategies you use to move that process forward to build trust and communication so that work can get done even when you're not there. So with that as our background, I'd like to launch the second poll now to get a sense of how often you delegate. So please go ahead and fill out the poll about how often you delegate. That's good. We've got some people delegating. That is excellent. And what I like to talk about is the process used for getting work done. And this is the collective engineering approach. There are actually 2 myths about getting work done that are floating around. The first we've already talked about. Teamwork is cheating. There's this idea that if you get help from someone that you've somehow been bad and that somebody's going to find you out. And while that is true in school, and there are good reasons for that being true in school, out in the working world there are actually good reasons to work together as a team. The second myth is delegate and it's done. People have this sense that they just ask for something to be done, and the expectation is that it will get done automatically. And this is the myth we're really going to be looking at today, that when we look at delegating, when we look at deadlines, how do you make those deadlines happen ahead of time? How do you kind of reduce the stress that causes that? And there are 2 ways of delegating, of course. There's delegating to ourselves and delegating to other people. And we'll be working through both of those. I believe those are connected. And I think the real power in collective engineering is that the more you can teach the people you work with these types of skills, the better everyone works together as a team. So the more people who understand that teamwork is a process, the better everything works together. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about methods of getting work done and the teamwork involved in that. I will stop for questions occasionally along the way. So if you have questions or formulating questions, please go ahead and type them in and send them forward, and I will address them as we move forward. So next, why deadlines? Well, the main topic we're going to be talking about today are that deadlines are all about trust. When you think about a deadline, you think about trust. And why is that? Well, deadlines are really about coordinating events, right? There are so many things going on, so many people involved, that deadlines help keep things in order, right? Deadlines help keep things moving in an orderly way. And, you need to get that sales presentation in this week because the customer has certain things coming up that they need to get done. You need to get the budgeting done this week because next week is a certain thing that you need that information for. So as you move through your day, as other people move through your day, there are all these dependencies, there's all this push and pull, and what we're really looking at when we look at deadlines is the trust. Do people trust you to get things done? Do you trust other people to get things done? And once again, what we'll be looking for today is to develop some of these skills so that you don't have to follow up as much, so that you can more trust people. Again, the trust is the kind of thing that develops over time. So we're going to be talking about specific strategies that we can use so that we can build up this trust. And how are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, the way that I got involved in delegating and in deadlines, my kind of initial thought in going to deadlines, and how I learned what I'm talking about today. Then we're going to discuss 3 specific practical techniques that you can start using immediately to help you beat your deadlines more effectively. And then at the end, I have a special talk I give about delegating versus abdicating. So what a lot of people consider delegating is actually abdicating. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between delegating and abdicating and how to move between them. So let's talk about my story. I built my first computer when I was 13 years old. Yes, I am that much of a geek. Yes, I had that little experience in teamwork. I got out into the working world. I got on a job in my first team, and it was the first time I was presented with a set of tasks and deadlines that I couldn't finish on my own, that I depended on other people. And what followed was a lot of years of frustration, kind of in scheduling and how to get things done and how to make that happen. A turning point for me definitely came when I got a boss I worked at a web startup for a while, and a boss named Rick showed up one day, and Rick was the best boss that I had ever worked for. And a lot of the work that I do today is modeled on working with Rick. And the thing about Rick was that there was just this enormous amount of trust. You could count on him having our back. In computers, there was such a push to add more things, and so schedules never made any sense. And Rick was really the first person I met who made the schedules make sense. And anytime somebody wanted to add something to the schedule, he was quick to say, anytime the VP came running over with a new idea, Rick was quick to say, okay, it's just worth upsetting the apple cart. The VP would say, what do you mean? Well, we have a schedule, and we're on track for that schedule, and changing it will cause a slip in the schedule. And is this worth slipping the schedule for? Oh, no, got to keep the schedule straight. And there was such a wonderful feeling of working in an environment like that, where somebody kind of knew what the deadlines were and knew what we were committed to and was willing to stick by those commitments. And you better believe that when you committed to something with Rick, he held you to it, and we'll talk about some of the strategies around that as well. But so the keys here it was really trust. That he built up that trust in us, right? We saw that when he committed to a deadline, and he was there for us and making sure that nobody pulled us off track. And he built the same thing for us. That when we committed to something, we would trust. And I remember I went to him occasionally with things, and I said, well, I think it's going to take this long. And he'd say, well, if you considered this, and if you considered that, and last time this took this amount of time, and so we kind of worked through what all the different pieces were. And it really helped make a better schedule. It really helped make for a very cool approach. And so today, as many of you know, I own 2 different businesses. I'm an active member in 5 different networking groups. I run a volunteer organization with about 150 people. I have a wife, a new baby, and a newer baby on the way. And people say to me all the time, how many hours are in your day? How can you get all of that done? And that's what I'm going to be sharing today. A lot of what I've learned are habits that enable me to beat my deadlines, enable me to get things done more efficiently, that kind of reduce the stress in my life so that I can get all these things done. And, do I stay up late at night doing work? Sometimes, but my real goal is to keep work during the workday and have family time at night. And I know that's what a lot of people are looking for. A lot of my clients are looking for that. And so that's what we're working on today. It took me years to figure this stuff out, and my sincere hope for you is that by working in this kind of context, that you can do this more quickly, that we can come to these kind of wonderful ways of doing things more quickly. So we're going to move on to the next poll now. And so let's pretend that today is Monday, and I have a deadline. Somebody's working with me has a deadline for Friday. When is the best time to follow up with them? So go ahead and let me know when you think the best time to follow up at a deadline would be. Whoops. Now the poll's up. Sorry. So let me know, when is the best time to follow up? If today is Monday and the deadline is Friday, when is the best time to follow up? Excellent. That's good. Thank you for your feedback, everyone. So when you're talking about deadlines, when you're talking about following up with things, I like to talk about putting first things first. And the first thing first is you want to decide whether you are going to be a partner in your colleague's success, or whether you like to set them up for failure. And I'm happy to report that a lot of you on the call know that the idea is to follow up sooner rather than later. I work with a lot of people who like to follow up the day of the deadline or the day after the deadline to find out that it's been done. And when you do that, you're actually setting up a situation where you've set them up for failure, right? If it's not done, then there's no way to fix it, right? You've come to them with something and it's not done, and you've kind of removed any possibility, right? If it was due Friday and now it's Monday and they haven't done it, they can scramble to get it done, but it still was not done in time. And so what I like to talk with people about is being part of the success. And I think the best time to follow up with people is usually Wednesday, right? For most things that are going on, a couple of days in advance is a good follow-up time. And sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised that it's already done. You don't need to think about it anymore. A lot more times you'll find out that something is in the way, or they hadn't thought about it, or they've forgotten about it. And I'm really not making judgments about people, right? I mean, I believe that I love employees, and I think that everybody's always trying to do their best job. And I think that our job as leaders is to help people be in that kind of situation. So it's to help people make the right kinds of decisions and help people move through the work that they're doing. And so what you want to do is follow up with people beforehand. And that the other thing that does is set yourself up as a leader that you are committed to that deadline. I work with several bosses, not Rick, but other bosses that I work with, that I would only do something for them if they asked me for it for a third time, because a lot of times they would throw around things that they thought should be done, but they didn't really need them done. And I learned that the third time they would really want it done. So after the third time they asked me, I would actually go ahead and do it. And as leaders, I would encourage you to think in your work and the work that you do, what sort of environment you're creating for your employees, right, and for the people that you work with. Are you committed to the deadlines that you set up? The cool thing about it is that if you follow up beforehand for the deadline for a little while, and usually this work takes 2 to 4 months, but if you follow up with people before the deadline, after a while you won't need to follow up so much anymore, because they will know that that's your approach. They'll know that that's where you're going to, and they'll know that that's what you expect. And so in that way, you're really setting them up more for success. And you're setting yourself up more to keep the deadlines moving forward, because you know kind of in your head that things are going, right? You know that when someone commits to something that's going to get done, you trust that's going to happen for you. And I also want to give tips for yourself, right? As how does this relate to work that you're doing, right? How do you beat your own deadlines, not just the deadlines of the people who work for you, but your own deadlines? And one of the great ways of doing that is to put ticklers in your calendar beforehand, right? I mean, you want to put the deadline on the actual deadline, But if you have a deadline coming up and you're going to need to do work on it beforehand, it's a really good idea to put something in your calendar that's a few days before, or a few days before, so that you remember that you have to do it, and you're not kind of stuck scrambling at the end. So the first technique we're talking about is to follow up before the deadline, and it works both for yourself and for people who are working with you. Put ticklers in place so that you can follow up to let people know the deadline is solid, and over time what you're doing is clearing up that communication path so that people know that when you ask for something that you're going to want it done, and then they trust that the work they're doing is the work that you actually want them doing, and you can trust that they're doing this work and they're going to get it done in time. And I have working for me, I also own another business, and I have somebody who's running that business for me. He's been working with me for 6 years. It took us about 2 years to develop the kind of trust that I could be away from the business for a week and he could run it without me. And again, what we're talking about today are some of the techniques that we used for that to build this up over time, to help know. So, and I'll talk about him later on, but I know even when I'm not there what he's doing, and we're going to talk about those techniques for building trust. So once again, the first technique that we've talked about is following up before the deadline. The next technique we're going to talk about is, let's suppose that you're going to run the marathon next year. So what sorts of things would you need to do today if you were going to run the marathon next year? You might go look at shoes. You might do a little stretching. You might go look for a personal trainer. Look online. So you'd have some things you do if you were going to do that next week. Now let's pull it in. Let's suppose that you were running the marathon next month. What would you need to do if you were running the marathon next month? Well, you probably want to buy your shoes. The shoes need to be broken in before you actually run the marathon. You probably want to be doing some actual running to get yourself into shape. And then what we do is think, okay, suppose you're running the marathon next week. What do you need to do? Well, maybe now it's time to make the changes in your diet. Maybe you have a plan that you're working, that you're running each day, trying to get ready for that. And then the last step is, okay, suppose I was running the marathon tomorrow. What would I need to do today to prepare myself to run the marathon tomorrow? And the way I like to map this over actually happened to me yesterday. I was working with a coach on my presentation skills, and for those of you who have been following me for a while, you may notice a different style in my presentation today. And at 4 p.m. yesterday, I was working with this coach, and we were talking about ways you can update presentations. And I said, oh, that sounds great. I said, over the next couple of weeks, I can kind of start integrating that into the work that I'm doing. I said, I have a presentation tomorrow. And he said, really? He said, what we've talked about, is it going to take you more than an hour to put that in place? I said, well, probably not. He said, in fact, I think it'll probably be easier for you than what you've got now. He said, it might even make things faster for you if you use this new style. I said, that's interesting. He said, so what if you just did tomorrow's presentation under this new style? And I said, it's funny you say that to me. I said, because this is exactly what I'm teaching tomorrow. I said, I'm teaching this concept of the collapsing deadline, that when something comes up that you want to do, a lot of people's tendency, and it's just human nature, but a lot of people's tendency is, well, so I'll start working on that, and I can kind of think about doing that. And I find a lot of times with myself and with my clients that doing this exercise of, okay, suppose this thing was due at the end of today, right? And instead of over 2 weeks changing my presentation style, what if I needed to do it today? And the cool thing about it is that now the project's over. Right now I have this new style. The new presentations that I write will have this look and feel. It's not causing stress for me by being something that's hanging over my head. And so I really encourage people that I work with, and actually let's do a little exercise now. What I'd like to do is have you think about some deadline that's about 1 to 3 weeks out. So something that's on your mind that's coming up, something that's about 1 to 3 weeks out. So just get in your head now some deadline that's coming up. Everyone got something in mind? Good. Okay, so now you've got that deadline that's coming up. The strategy is it's about noon today on Thursday, right? So the first thing we're going to do is think about, okay, what if you needed to get that done by the end of the day tomorrow? What if the deadline for that, instead of being 1 to 3 weeks from now, was actually end of the day tomorrow? What is the kind of thing you would need to do today in order to get that done? So let's just think about, if you're in front of paper, you can kind of write down some ideas. But what sorts of things you need to do if that deadline were suddenly moved up to tomorrow and you needed to get it done? Excellent. You're doing great. And so now we're still working with the same deadline. There's kind of a sense that maybe we need to do it tomorrow. Now, so now it's afternoon. It's lunchtime on Thursday. What if it needed to be done by the end of today? What would you need to do today in order to get that thing done? So I'll give you a minute to think about that. Kind of, if you had to do it today, what would you need to do to get it done by the end of today? Great. Now, what I would encourage you, and what I always promise from these, is you get practical strategies that you can use immediately. And what I'd encourage you to do is, no matter what your afternoon is like, no matter what's going on, I would encourage you to spend 10 minutes on something related to that deadline that's coming up. And the reason I say this is that when I told you to pick a deadline that's 1 to 3 weeks out, you automatically went to a deadline, and it's a deadline that's on your mind. It's something that you're thinking about. It's something that's happening. And there are two possibilities with that. The first is there's not much work to do on it. And the second is that there is a lot of work to do on it. And if there's not a lot of work to do on it, then the fact that it's on your mind is draining your energy and causing stress, even if you're not really feeling it. And the way to realize this is if you spend 10 to 30 minutes this afternoon doing that work, right, if you've got a meeting to plan, you just kind of write out the agenda and put it in the file for 2 weeks from now, you'll be amazed at what relief that causes and how it allows you to beat your deadlines, right? And you're no longer kind of fighting the clock on that. You've got it set, and it's all ready to go, and you can move forward with the work that you're doing. And so the collapsing deadline is really about this exercise. It's not that you have to do it by tomorrow, right? And you may be thinking, well, but, I have this. There's no way I can complete this by tomorrow. Excellent. But given that you can't wait now 2 weeks until it's actually due to start working on it, so there is still work you can do today to move that forward. And the discipline is to just kind of keep in mind the deadlines that are coming up and think about ways you can do that. And I do this with myself. As most of you know, I do 3 to 4 webinars a month. I'm always writing presentations. I always have a presentation coming up. And this is a discipline that I have when it pops to me that it's time to do it. I sit down for, it usually takes 20 minutes or so to chart out what the presentation is going to be about. And then I rip that sheet of paper off and put it in my file. And then I've done that work. And I'm no longer stressed about what I'm going to talk about. And there's still work that I need to do to put the presentation together, but I've taken that step, but I've taken that step towards it. And so it's really about taking those steps and moving everything forward. So the second thing we've talked about is the collapsing deadline. So I'd like to take a quick moment now. I'm going to be quiet for a moment. I'd like you to think about kind of what we've talked about: the follow-up before the deadline and the collapsing deadline. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in. If you have any thoughts about them, please feel free to write them down for yourself, just to kind of get this into your head and start thinking about it. So what we're doing is just thinking now. If you have any comments or questions, please send them through about collapsing deadlines or follow-up before the deadline. Great. Seems like everyone is on board. I've got some questions coming through. I'm going to save them for a little later, but thank you for putting the questions through. Keep on sending through your comments and your questions. That is great. I'm now going to put up our 4th poll. And the 4th poll is: the first step in trusting is to. So please go ahead and let me know what you think is the first step in trusting. Excellent. It's split right down the middle between trusting and not trusting. That is perfect. So yes, the first step in trusting and the way you develop trust is, well, so I have a story about that as well. So how do you develop trust? That's what really we're talking about here, right? As we talk about beating your deadlines, we talk about deadlines being equivalent to trust. And when we talk about trusting, I like to tell the story. Suppose I'm driving from Boston to LA. So I got my car all ready to go. I fill the tank with gas, and I head out, and I drive. I'm based in Boston, so I drive out the Mass Pike West to cross over into New York, and I pass through Albany. And after about 8-10 hours, I'm heading through Syracuse, and a little light goes on my dashboard. I'm low on gas. And the question I ask is, at this point, do I curse the fact that my car will never get me to LA? You know, do I question my commitment to getting to LA? Do I kick my car and, you know, go find somebody to trade the car in because obviously this car is not worth, you know, obviously this car won't do it? Or do I take the step of filling the car up with gas? And I tell this story because what is built up in our society, it seems like a silly story, except that what is built up in our society is this trust that when the light goes on in the car just needs gasoline. And what we talk about when we're building trust in a working kind of environment is the same sort of thing, that a lot of people find work and the work doesn't get done, and they take that as kind of a vision that they've failed, when in fact all they need to do is refuel the tank, right? You just need to kind of take the next step and move forward. And so the way that we develop trust is I teach this 4-step delegation process. And what we're going to be talking about today is the third step. If you're interested in more information on this, I encourage you to go to the website or look for the upcoming webinars. We'll have an upcoming webinar on the 4-step delegation process. We'll go through that step by step. I mentioned earlier the general manager of my business right now, and one of the first things I did when he came on board, it's a window cleaning business, and so one of the first things I did was when we went to a bigger job site, I would let him run the job site. So I would just be a worker, and I would let him run the job site. And the other owners in my franchise system did not understand what I was doing. You're the owner, you're the boss. You know, you should tell him what to do. And my point of view was that I wanted to build a trust with him. I wanted to know how he was going to run these sorts of job sites, and the best way to do that, from my point of view, was to be there on the job site with him and let him delegate to me, right? Let him set up what needed to be done, let him set the deadlines for me. And that gave me a lot of information about how he worked with people, how he made decisions. And early on in the process, he and I talked a lot. You know, as he was making decisions, we would talk back and forth. And as time went on, he needed me less and less. He was just more running the job site, and I was just doing the work. And eventually, we hired someone to take my job because, you know, you can hire people to clean windows. And then I had the trust with him that he was working that job site. And the really cool thing about this, and the thing I really enjoy about collective engineering, is when he used this technique for the people that worked for him, because he doesn't actually do the cleaning anymore. He now trusts a couple of crew leads to do the work. And he used the same technique with them. He just became a worker, and he let them take the lead on the job site. And I've seen this work again and again. I'll talk about our next month's program, which says stress-free vacations. But this is actually the key to a stress-free vacation, because if you switch roles with the employee who's going to be taking over for you, that gives both you and the employee the ability to see what's going on. It allows you to trust each other and to trust what they know about what's going on. And so this is really the third technique that I wanted to talk about today. When we talk about how to build trust, what you do is you build trust by trusting, but you trust in a very contained way, right? I didn't trust the guy who ran the business for me by bringing him in and saying, okay, go run the business, right? I brought him in by working side by side with him for a while and by teaching him what to do and letting him take the lead occasionally, and then kind of explicitly giving him the lead in all situations. And you build it up over time. And again, there's this myth in our society that you delegate and it's done, that for some reason you would be able to say to someone, go get this done, and they would just go do it. And the basis of collective engineering is that it's not true. That what you want to go in assuming is that when you give work to be done, it won't get done, and there are only 3 reasons it doesn't get done. And once you know those 3 reasons and you know techniques like this one, you can then move the process forward. You view it more as refueling on the way from Boston to LA, rather than scratching the project, right? That it's not worth it. And the same way, if you were driving from Boston to LA, your eventual goal is to be in LA. What we're talking about today on the call is the goal with beating your deadlines is to have the kind of team around you that you can trust to get the work done. And switching roles is really a key element of that, to find a time that you can switch roles and start to trust the person, and build the trust for the people that you're working with. I got a question coming through. Oh, great question. Thank you. So the question is, when is the right time to switch roles? And the right time to switch roles is when it's just before you think it's time. So you can do this a little bit earlier than you think it might make sense because you're still there. But if you have a particular thing coming up, you're going to be out of town, or if there's some particular case where they're going to need to be in this position, I recommend at least 2 to 4 weeks before that occurs. You just switch roles, and you can switch. You can switch roles for a couple of days and then not switch roles for a couple of days. But you'll find that as you switch roles, they start to get more comfortable. The person you're working with will start to get more comfortable with the work, and you will become more comfortable with what they're doing, or you won't. Right? It could be that they're not ready for it. It could be that there's more training that's involved. And getting all that information is useful, right? When people come to me all the time and say, okay, how do I know I can trust my employees? And switch roles is really a key to that. That when you switch roles with someone, you're in the situation where you can observe them and work with them in the way they're going to be working with other people. And that is the way that you really develop trust. So I'd like to circle back around now to our collective engineering model. And once again, what we teach is delegating so work gets done. And this has to do with deadlines and trust, because that is what you're building up, right? What you're building up is the ability to know that you can trust people to get the work done. And once again, what we've talked about today is that this work happens over time, right? We're taught in our individual skills that we need to do all the work ourselves, and we haven't learned that there are communication paths between people that, the same way that I wouldn't listen to my manager and some of my managers until they said things 3 times. People take different approaches to how deadlines are going, and part of your job as a leader is to train people to work with deadlines the way that you want them to work. And there's a process to that, and this process goes with following up before the deadline to help them through it, to collapsing the deadlines, to making sure that we're not leaving everything to the last minute, to switching roles so that you can give them more responsibility, so you can empower them more and move them forward, and that was the 3rd step. And so at this point, I'd like to launch the final poll and ask you, of the 3 strategies we just talked through, which one you found most valuable today. Excellent. Thank you. And I would like to say that next month, so the Leadership Lunch Webinars is a monthly webinar program. And next month is one of my favorite programs. I call it Stress-Free Vacations. It's going to be at the end of July. And there's more information on the website. And if you're at all interested in this beating the deadlines and kind of having things happen while you're not there, I really recommend you come to that. Stress-Free Vacations is one of my absolute favorite programs. And so now, as we wrap up here, we've got a few minutes left. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to send those through. I will say that there's a survey that I'm going to do at the end. The survey will pop up at the end, and this program is really for you. So please feel free to fill out the survey. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what other things you'd like to see, because my goal is always to provide the kind of good productivity tools that will help you in the work that you're doing. So we're going to take a couple of minutes to take questions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about delegate versus abdicate. So I'm just going to go quiet while you formulate questions or any comments. Please feel free to send those through. Oh, great, good question. Thank you. Couldn't that cause more stress? Thank you. That's a great question. Yes. The thing about collapsing deadlines is it's really an exercise. When you look at leadership, there's times to practice leadership and times to actually be doing leadership. And I view the collapsing deadline not as you absolutely have to get this thing done today, but I view it as an exercise that kind of shows you where things are, right? I mean, if you think about this, if you think about the deadline and you realize that 30 minutes worth of work will get it done and you can just do it and be done with it, that's great. If you're thinking about it and you realize that there is actually several days worth of work that needs to be done, maybe you need to put a couple of hours into it this afternoon to keep it moving forward. Right now you've caught it, and instead of realizing that the day before it's actually due and pulling an all-nighter to finish it, you've caught that the day before. So I actually find collapsing deadlines to be much less stressful because almost invariably it's less of an issue than I thought it was going to be, right? When the deadline seems to be looming, and yet when I sit down to actually work on it, it goes away. And I've got a bunch of occasions where this has happened with my clients as well. We've had something that's kind of been looming, and we sat down and did 30 minutes or an hour's worth of work, and suddenly it was just done. We didn't need to think about it again. it was gone. And you know, the meeting still may be coming up a couple of weeks from now, but you can file that, you know, in a place for that meeting, and then you can move on from there. So that's really where the collapsing deadlines. Because I think of it more as an exercise than a way of adding stress. And I think that if you try it, you'll find that it actually reduces your stress because it gives you more of a sense of what's at stake and what needs to be done. Great, thank you. I appreciate all the participation. So, delegating versus abdicating. The work. A lot of people, again, there's this myth that you delegate and it's done. And what the myth causes people to do is things like go to someone and say, hey, you know, I know you can get this done. Just go ahead and do it for me and let me know when you're done. And the truth is that you really, I view that as abdicating, because part of your job as a leader and part of your job as a delegator and somebody who's pushing for deadlines is to help people succeed. And as we've talked about today, there are ways to help people along the way, right? You know, you can help them collapse deadlines to get things done ahead of time. There's follow-up. You can switch roles with them to kind of give them the skills they need to get this done when you're not there. And there are a bunch more collective engineering kinds of things. If you're interested in more of that, you can go to ReadySetDelegate.com. There's more information about that there, kind of how we do this kind of collective engineering work. And so the delegating is actually goes back to this idea of driving the Boston to LA, that along the way there will be detours, there will be things you need to do to the car, but in the end you expect that you're getting there. And collective engineering gives you that same sort of approach as you're moving through working with people and developing teams that can get work done even when you're not there. And so as you're developing that and as you're using these techniques, that's really where you're headed, to the point that you can know that the work is going to get done, that you can trust the people that you're working with, and that you can beat your deadlines. So thank you very much, everyone, for being on the call. Please do fill out the survey afterwards, because this program is for you, and I'm always interested in your feedback. And I look forward to seeing you next month for stress-free vacations. Thanks a lot, everyone, and have a great afternoon.